Hello.
Our story begins on the escape from Ochia Bestoon. Lando Calrissian and Luke Skywalker, heroes of the war against the Empire, were tracking down disappearances in the Outer Rim. Among the people that had been claimed by this unknown force was Lando's daughter, Kadera. While searching for his little girl, they received communication from a family of 3, one traveling with their own daughter. It was said that they were on the run from an evil, Empire-aligned force, and to Lando, the girl was the same age as Kadera would have been. After his daughter went missing, a hole opened in Lando's heart. He and his friends had been tirelessly searching for her, with little to no results. Luke and Leia were typically the least active in these searches, due to being a senator and Grand Master. But Luke was here with Lando now. Their trail had brought them to a space station over Therazar, called Nightside. The year was 20 ABY. Blaster fire and screaming filled the hallways of Nightside Space Station. The family of 3 were trapped inside the yacht of the administrator of Nightside. He was going to sell them over to Ochia Bestoon for his own reward. Miramar and Dathan were trying to reroute power into the bridge of the ship so that they could escape Nightside. Even though they believed in the new Jedi Order, they couldn't wait around all day for the Jedi to find them. Dathan knew who was searching for them: his evil father, Emperor Palpatine, the fallen sycophant that wanted to destroy the galaxy with the flex of his hand. The Emperor had no interest in Dathan. He was a clone created prior to the Snoke experiments. He had no sensitivity to the Force, and was the only clone that turned out normally, just a regular human. The plan had been for Dathan to procreate, but he escaped Exegol before Sidious could ever personally free him. Ochia Bestoon was hunting them down so that the Emperor could experiment on his daughter, Rey. She was the biological granddaughter, but she meant nothing to Sidious. He wanted her for what she could provide, whether that be answers to his magnificent failure with Project Necromancer, or an individual to essence transfer into him. Sidious could exploit Rey, as he had Maul, Dooku, and Vader. He could train her to the level of a true Sith Lord, and force her to kill him. In her rage, he could essence transfer into her, and take all of her power for himself. Sidious could only take, it's all he knew. Dathan, his runt son, had answers to the survival of the Sith. He knew, because of Ojai. If Luke Skywalker found out, then it could be the end of the Sith, finally. Unluckily for Ojai, Luke and Lando would be rerouted into the yacht's hangar bay, because of the chaotic crowd. Ojai's band of thugs arrived to create a disruption. He wanted to find the family, and inadvertently led Luke and Lando straight to them. Miramar and Dathan were too preoccupied by the ship to notice Lando or Luke in the bay, but Rey did. She was tired, but she saw the flashing of Lando's golden cape, and she demanded to see it better. When Miramar took a glance out the window in a state of panic, she immediately felt a sigh of relief, and she started banging on the window. Luke and Lando were in the middle of a discussion, so it was R2, who trailed along behind them, that noticed. Skywalker used the Force to break the restraints on the ramp, and ignited his lightsaber, just as a precaution in case there were armed guards inside the vessel. Luckily, there were not. Lando was both overjoyed but heartbroken again. Kadera wasn't with the family. However, there was something that Lando could take value in. He saved someone else from suffering the same pain he felt every waking moment. The 2 New Republic heroes got a hold of the family and rushed them back to the Lady Luck so that they could escape Nightside Space Station. Rey would be asleep by the time the ship left the hangar bay, and it'd be perfect, because the adults needed time to talk about this, without the 5-year-old eavesdropping. The conversation began with the broad basics of the aforementioned information. Dathan was terrified for his family, and he felt the weight of it, because he knew it would eventually come to haunt him. Luke and Lando just wanted to fully understand what. See, aside from searching for Kadera and the family of 3 that was passed off by some random New Republic pilot, Luke had experienced something supernatural, even by his standards. The Jedi Grand Master utilized the Seeing Stone on Tython to search through the Force. He, for the past few months, and truthfully 15 years since Endor, had nightmares of the Emperor's throne room. It both came from the dark aura that surrounded him inside that forsaken place, but also the trauma he faced at Palpatine's hands. Recently though, these nightmares had been more frequent. They spun in his mind and tormented him. Sometimes he'd become ill after seeing a red honeycomb zone somewhere inside the unknown regions. When Luke went to Tython and utilized the Seeing Stone, He was transported to Exegol, where he experienced torment unlike anything since Endor. The Sith, because of Yoda's apparition appearing before Sidious prior to his defeat over Endor, had learned the pathway to absorb force projections and ghosts. Luke was on Exegol. His feet touched its surface, and his skin was embraced by its cold temperatures. Sith spirits outside the temple tried to consume him. If it weren't for his father, Luke would have been lost to time. Anakin was perhaps the only Force ghost strong enough to protect Luke. It made the Jedi Master wary, but Dathan had just confirmed his fears. No longer did he feel like a madman latching on the trauma. It was real. The Emperor had survived. Miramar and Dathan wanted to know what would happen to them. Luke suggested a temporary separation, only if their daughter allowed it. If Ochi was hunting them, then he would never find his way to the Jedi Temple on Ossus. Leia could arrange a home for the three of them and offer them protection at the capital. Coruscant was still the technical capital of the New Republic, and it would be for the next 8 years, so they'd be situated on a very large ecumenopolis. Or, of course, there might be the choice to live on Chandrila, just depended. Miramar was quite adamant that Rey be given the chance to train with the Jedi. Dathan eventually echoed those same sentiments. It wouldn't be arranged, more so selected by Rey. The promise that she would be allowed to see her family again and reunite with them. Luke had allowed that for his students, especially after Grogu's decision with the Mandalorian. Master Skywalker wasn't nearly as dogmatic as the Old Order, but he still had much to learn. That was the burden of tying together the failed generation with the one meant to survive. There was so much unspoken pressure between those lines, but Luke shouldered it well. Upon the drop-off of Miramar and Dathan to Chandrila, Luke and Rey would receive transport inside the Millennium Falcon back to Ossus. Han was missing his son. It had been harder on him than on Leia, since Ben went off to train with Luke. That perhaps was always the hardest thing for Han, watching people say goodbye. He knew Ben would come back around at some point, but he just wished that they could have had more time. He took up an interest in the conversations between Rey and Luke. Most of these were reflective of the first conversations shared between Luke and Han inside the very same bay 20 years before. The mystical power that tied the galaxy together. Han believed in it now. He trusted in what the Force was, so he added little pieces for Rey to hear. Luke allowed Han to take up most of the conversation because Rey was so enamored with the way he spoke and his mannerisms. Han was meant to be a father. He just struggled with the more intimate parts, the vulnerability that came with it. That was the difference, for Ben at least. Leia was always a vulnerable parent. Han was sometimes a bit of a conflict, but someone who always pushed Ben positively. When they arrived at Ossus, the 5-year-old Rey was quite tired again, so Luke had her taken to her own residence so she could sleep. In the meantime, Han got to spend some time with Ben, and Luke started a new instruction for the rest of the class. Everything slowed down for a moment, and peace returned to Luke's heart, but it would only last through the evening. Knowing that Rey was directly related to Palpatine was a burden. It was the burden that Obi-Wan could never take. He knew that Luke had the potential to become Vader, and allowed Owen to push him away from training him. Luke couldn't be afraid. Rey's presence changed everything. Instead of seeing the vision inside of her head, it was the nightmares within his own mind. The Ochi case was recent. The reality of Palpatine's return was no longer fiction, and thus, Luke's mind was rewarded with torture. In the night, when his temple settled down, and the Jedi found themselves asleep peacefully, free from the scourge of the Sith, Luke was embraced by their dark grips. He envisioned Rey sitting on her grandfather's throne with a dark-colored saber, the cultists of the Sith echoing out her name, Palpatine, and at her feet, the expressionless gazes of every single one of his students and friends dead. The galaxy preparing to bend their knee to a Palpatine that would finish what Sidious started. It shot Luke up from his rest, his heart rate skyrocketed, and his saber swung into his hands, but when reality hit him, the ignition did not hurt anyone. Luke looked around, gripping his saber harder before releasing his grip and reigniting it. He rubbed his eyes and realized that he needed to find Sidious. With every rub of his eyes, he saw the capital, Coruscant, being engulfed by the fire of 1,000 suns. Not even the Death Stars were that powerful. Luke got up and immediately contacted Lando. He needed someone to watch over the temple grounds as he went on his search for the Emperor. Lor Santaka was here when they were gone, but he left following Luke's return. Lor had other locations to scout out, He was searching for relics of the past. Calrissian was willing to be there for Luke and watch over the temple grounds in the meantime. Lando even considered requesting for Leia to join him, because he could feel the fear in Luke's voice. This wasn't a concentrated will from another individual. These were visions from the Force. Luke immediately, with R2 by his side, departed from Ossus and ventured deep into the unknown regions. By morning, the temple would be under the control of Han Solo, truly a terrifying scenario. He didn't have any lessons planned, so it was time for a hike into the nearby forests and mountains. The Jedi students were all excited, and Rey was slightly anxious, but she was ready to go and follow along. Han would watch over her with Ben by their sides. Luke, on the other hand, exited from hyperspace near the location that Dathan remembered. It was a red honeycomb zone, a nebula of sorts that surrounded Exegol. The pathway to killing Sidious was through a space anomaly, but that's all Dathan could say. He didn't know about Kaiza hiding out in an abandoned separatist battleship from the Clone Wars. He didn't know about the need for a Sith Wayfinder. He just knew that Exegol was at a certain location in the galaxy. Similar to Kamino, for Obi-Wan decades before, all the gravity in this sector of space was pulling towards one location. Luke just needed to find a way in. Ossus, on the other hand, was a paradise for Rey. Despite her birthplace, Rey had no memories of forests, trees, bushes, or tall grass. She was enamored with all of it, the flowers too. The dew that hit her when she walked past it. Everything was a paradise. Rey was born on a forested world, a planet called Hypercarn, but she was only a baby when they left, because of the threats of the Sith. Han welcomed her into this world, the way a father could. When Lando arrived, the same sentiment would continue, and the fun antics would be heightened. What's more fun than learning how to win at Sabacc with Lando and Han? The answer is nothing. Didn't help that Lando was a generational cheater. This was more of Rey's speed anyways. Watching adults yell at cards and laugh. It's what she saw all the time when they temporarily docked inside of space stations. And this new life for Rey would become her next few months, with a twist. Leia would be brought out to Ossus during the Senate recess, due to another vote to pass a military protection bill. The Senate was fighting it, Mon Mothma was gone, and the centrists duked it out with the populists. The New Republic was led by a coalition of systems that either wanted more government oversight and protection, or a more unified individual system sacked. The Empire had done its damage, died and or disappeared, and the Senate was left in the same shambles that put Mon Mothma and Bail Organa through hell for decades. Senator Organa Solo would use this recess to join the Jedi on Ossus. She too needed the fresh air, and because of Luke's elongated journey to the unknown regions, the Jedi needed instruction from someone. It would be Leia that Rey would learn the Force from the first time. Of course, she brought Miramar and Dathan with her. By this point, thanks to some brave rebel pilots, Wedge Antilles, Shara Bey, and Kes Dameron, Ochia Bestoon was dead. They intercepted him entering Chandrillan airspace, and cut him out of the sky. The family was completely safe as far as anyone knew. What developed on Ossus were the building blocks for a potentially secure Jedi Order. This was in part thanks to Leia's instruction with the Force, but also what Luke was doing in the unknown regions. Leia and Han took up these parental roles for Rey, while Miramar and Dathan were adjusting to their new life without the Sith. Leia was overly cautious with the attachments, because she knew what could happen to a child if they lost their parents. Just look at her father with Shmi. So Leia's caution, which could be interpreted as similar to the old Jedi Order, kept the parents a little separated from their daughter, but the assurance was that Rey would never be alone. Not only would Han and Leia take care of her whenever they were on Ossus, but Ben did too. He, at the age of 15, saw her as a little sister in many ways, especially because of Han's initial response to make sure she kept up with the group during their hike. But it also became clear that she and Ben shared a dyad in the Force. Leia wasn't fully sure, but the dynamic between the two of them was very strong naturally. But that left Luke, now 2 months into his hunt for Sidious, the only one who could clarify if Rey and Ben were in fact a dyad. Master Skywalker had found Kaiza wearing the mask of Exim Panchard inside the Separatist battleship. He tried to spare her life, but the corruption of the dark side forced them into a confrontation in which he would take her life. It troubled him, because Luke frequently went out of his way to save those under the influence of the dark side. But there was, fortunately, a silver lining in all of this. Kaiza left behind clues, checkpoints that she had used to get into the red honeycomb zone, just not to Exegol. This was started after Rey escaped the clutches of the Sith. Luke then used these to break through the nebula and find his way to Exegol, with a little bit of trust from the Force, where he would land outside the Upside Down Temple. Luke sat inside of his X-Wing for a moment once he landed. This planet was everything the Sith were, a secret, brooding, and purely evil. He swung himself out of the ship and started towards the heart of the Sith home. Luke faced very little resistance. He carried with him the mask of Viceroy Exum Panchard. It, in some ways, concealed him from the darkness. The Sith didn't know he was there. As Luke went deeper, he felt the swelling of the Force. It stretched itself around him and pulled him closer, like he felt on the second Death Star. He was unsure if he would actually emerge victorious here, but then he found it. The labs where Necromancer had been finalized, or at least still being worked on. The Sith cultists evacuated, fearing the Jedi Master who snuck in on them, but Luke remained unbothered. He stepped past the scientific lab that remained behind, looking in the glass tubes and so forth. He then heard his name, Master Skywalker, called from the arena. Luke stepped forth, sensing the familiarity of his opponent. Sidious from his crane swung around and hung above Luke, telling his now old Jedi friend that it had been too long. Luke didn't do anything but watch. He wanted to know how, and the Emperor told him that he did indeed die. He was one with the Force, but he refused to let go. His essence transfer from death gave him a new body, one that could not withstand the power of the dark side. Luke raised his hand and crushed the crane. Palpatine slammed into the ground, and he told Skywalker in fear that if Luke killed him, then the dark side would find victory through him. Luke smiled. He knew. He crushed the support of the crane and it slammed down through the Emperor's back, killing him. A rippled shock tore through the facility, wiping out the Sith Eternal and the Final Order fleet below. Luke protected himself from the Force with a barrier. The last of the Sith had died. He quickly gathered every ounce of material from the labs and departed from Exegol, believing that he had won the war once again. Luke's return to Ossus would be somber. He had won, but something felt off. The Sith were destroyed, but there was someone or something else, perhaps more sinister, lurking out in the galaxy. Master Skywalker, as a result, returned to studying the information he collected, and with his friends present, they had a minor celebration, one of life. It would be Rey's chance to be fully embraced by her Jedi family. Luke may have still held restrictions on attachments, but he wasn't beyond giving members of the Order a chance to be happy. He did not limit their joy, and they appreciated him for it. Rey's training began with Leia, but it would also follow up with what Luke could instruct her. Leia's initial meditative lessons helped Rey harmonize with the Force. Some might call this the Force Awakens. Mostly due to her age and the fact that she wasn't totally orphaned on Jakku and left to fight for her life, she was able to develop specifically in the Force before ever coming around to using a weapon. Luke's focus inside of his order was specifically on the Force. He wanted the Jedi to be vessels of the mystical power. While lightsaber work was important, most of the lightsaber forms were destroyed by the Empire before Luke could ever find them. So the secrets of the ancient Jedi and Sith were lost to time. Master Skywalker had pieced together different fragments of lightsaber forms, and he instructed that, but nowadays, 40 years after the collapse of the old Jedi Order, no one really remembered how to deal with the Jedi, so having perfect forms didn't really matter. There were always individuals like Ochia Bestoon who had stood toe-to-toe with a Jedi in their past, but most thugs, individuals the Jedi frequently interacted with and stopped, never stood a chance, even against the low-level Padawans under Luke's instruction. The pride of the Order was always Ben Solo. He impressed frequently, and always progressed when no one else could. But Rey was next in line to emulate that. The 10-year age difference was something totally necessary to consider when Luke graded their development. But that dyad had benefited them both. As both young Jedi grew up, it only assisted them more with not only firming their connection to one another, but also helping their growth. All the while, as the Jedi continued growing and the dyad proved to be what Anakin should have been, Luke missed one important detail, something that never really made itself present. Because Sidious was killed long before he could fully corrupt Ben Solo, the Sith didn't have a chance at returning. Instead, the one that would have acted on behalf of Sidious was working with the First Order. No longer was the Empire connected back to the Sith, it was Snoke and the rising rebellion to the New Republic. but Snoke had no pre-existing connection to Ben Solo, nor did he care about having an apprentice. He would have cared had Sidious been given more time to develop those desires. Instead, Snoke was just a dark adept, an individual that collected artifacts and used sorcery to further progress into the Force. His control over the First Order was simple. He wanted power, and he wanted to force the New Republic into submission. Ben Solo, as a result, remained uncorrupted. The balance of the Dyad actually brought him more peace than anything. Because Ben had someone to look after, he became less focused on his own development, and more on those around him. As the grandson of Vader, he was already destined to soar above his peers. But because Rey was so young when she joined, he found it to be more important to develop her so that she could be an equal to the rest of their peers, because everyone else inside this Jedi Order, their age was akin to Ben's, i.e. 10 years older than she. However, even though the Sith were dead and Snoke didn't interfere with the Jedi Order, it didn't stop corruption from seeping through the Galactic Republic. Coruscant was a cesspool, and the Senate believed that moving to Hosnian Prime would change anything. It wouldn't. The structure of the Republic was fractured, it always would be, and it needed time to rebuild without the threat of a looming Imperial remnant. But they didn't have that luxury. Even as Rey and Ben grew up into functional Jedi Knights, they were forced to see the reality of the galaxy. They were left to fix. It was the burden of their familial lineages. Vader and Sidious, two men who flipped the galaxy upside down. It would have to be Solo and Rey that did the inverse. At this point, Rey rejected her lineage as a Palpatine. She understood her blood, and she also recognized that she was not that. Also, as a side note, going around the galaxy as a Palpatine wouldn't really work for anyone. Imagine referring to oneself as the granddaughter of the man who killed billions. Sidious was the master of genocide and public manipulation. It wouldn't be worth her life to try and change people's perspective to that name. All she owned, and what mattered to her, was her identity, her found family, and her parents. Dathan and Miramar were thriving on Chandrila, and just knowing that Rey was too on Ossus brought them eternal peace. Without Palpatine in his head, twisting him into the perfect manipulation, had many internal struggles. Utilizing a slave army, which it basically was, came with a multitude of problems. Snoke's regime had loyalty issues. Brainwashing babies from birth worked up until they committed genocide themselves. Not to mention, one of the founding members of the Shadow Collective, Brendol Hux, was just murdered by his own son and Captain Phasma. It was done in a fashion that many people found out about it, and as a result, it caused ripples throughout the First Order. This initially wouldn't have been problematic because they were supposed to get it done right. They just didn't do it right this time. Snoke was left with a couple of options, and he couldn't really rely on hoping that these bumbling fools would respect each other. General Hux was in command, the Knights of Ren were by his side, and Captain Phasma was given the go-ahead to wage war on outlying systems around the Rim. The New Republic was long past the militarization bills, so all that remained were old heroes from the Revolution, and a few patrol ships that were built up. The first attack from the First Order blindsided the galaxy, but it didn't really even create a large response. All anyone heard was an attack, but they all assumed it was done by pirates. No one saw the stormtroopers or the resurgent Star Destroyers. It was just a couple reports that came from outlying, not mainstream, media outlets about a skirmish. Leia Organa, now General, was leading the rebel group called the Resistance to fight off the First Order. Maybe she wasn't close with Saw Gerrera personally, and she barely ever spoke with him, but he left an impression on her. It was part of the reason for the Resistance's use of Dakar as a base of operations. Maybe their ideals and extremities were different, but just like how Saw Gerrera foresaw the rise of the Death Star, Leia knew the remnant force was coming. The Resistance jumped into action against the First Order, and got clobbered immediately. Due to the budget changes following the Revolution, the New Republic patrol cruisers were no match for a trio of resurgents, let alone one of them. Thousands died, and the Resistance was forced to pull back. Snoke knew that Starkiller was only a couple years away from completion, but without external conflict to keep the troops rallied, the First Order would fall apart from the inside out. He didn't want that. General Hux accidentally created a situation that had to be fixed. The Supreme Leader therefore took a hold of the supremacy and began leading his own strikes. Despite how impressive the First Order arsenal was, they didn't have the manpower to lose troops. This was still technically a rebellion of its own. These fights were only on the outside of the galaxy. Snoke believed that the Republic's corruption would dissuade them from acknowledging these battles, which inevitably ended up being true. While Luke never officially aligned the Jedi Order with the Resistance, he and his band of Jedi Knights departed from Ossus to stop the rising threat. Instead of finding themselves fighting off stormtroopers, they'd be forced into an engagement with the Knights of Ren. Thanks to Snoke's add-up powers, they'd be more comparable to sorcerers rather than just marauders. They weren't powerful, but they could use the Force. The Jedi and Knights of Ren attacked each other, with Grandmaster Luke leading the charge against Ren himself. Lightsabers collided, and the Jedi quickly dealt with the Knights before beginning their hunt for more information. Rey and Ben, during this engagement, fought alongside each other, taking on the largest group of the Knights, and eventually the few Praetorians who accompanied the Knights on their mission. The Jedi may have been too late to save the people that were murdered on the planet, but they would be victorious. The Knights of Ren would fall, and the Jedi would find a location to strike next. The First Order was crumbling, still. Snoke's efforts were valiant, but battles only meant so much without pride. Most of these conscriptions were awoken once they murdered innocents, and these weren't even small-town massacres. These were full-blown genocides. This again went to show the lack of care from within the new government. Leia petitioned frequently, but it got nowhere. Now the First Order was slaughtering potentially millions without anyone to stop them. The reinforcements from the Jedi Order was the only real motivation boost for the Resistance early on. They felt down on their luck frequently, because the New Republic didn't care. Leia constantly sent sufficient evidence to Hosnian Prime about the Imperial Remnant, and it always got rejected, neglected, or lost. Luke didn't like the idea of his order following in the footsteps of Yoda's old one, but he had no choice. They had to fight, and as far as he could tell, the Empire wasn't inside the Senate, like it was with Sidious. Luckily for the Jedi, they also weren't directly involved with the politics of the galaxy either. Leia's Resistance continued to funnel troops to forward command posts, so they could employ hit-and-run tactics against the First Order. Against dreadnoughts or destroyers, this absolutely worked. However, there remained what the Resistance believed was the largest ship in the Remnant's arsenal, the Supremacy. Nothing could challenge it. Even with Poe Dameron rising to their ranks and accompanied by the Millennium Falcon, still piloted by Chewie and Han, it would be nearly an impossible task. Snoke's regime, though, needed to stick together. The formation of leadership and sloppy hostile takeover from General Hux left many grunts curious if they could make their own strike for leadership. Snoke kept this balance by maintaining loyalty between the officers, but that didn't work for the grunts. As a result, during campaigns and massacres, stormtroopers would betray their First Order officers for a shot at ascension through the ranks. Without a Kylo Ren or Knights of Ren to dissuade this type of behavior, the forming coalition crumbled at every victory. It was one of the weirdest combination of military movements in galactic history. Starkiller Base was yet to be finished, and Snoke forced himself to be present via hologram for every battle. It was evident that the troops needed extra motivation, so he killed those that betrayed them. Snoke, as a result, then surrendered his Praetorian Guard. Despite the tension in the ranks, no one thought of usurping Snoke. He was seen as the second Emperor, the rightful replacement of Palpatine's regime. So by utilizing his guard at every campaign or battle, the troops would slow their interest for taking power for themselves, but the damage was already done to their ranks. Even if the New Republic showed little care towards the First Order, the Resistance gained new freedom fighters after these incidents made news around the Rim specifically. Leia was villainized by political rivals years before, but people still believed in her because she helped lead the rebellion to victory. She would do it again. Lando's connections in the core, alongside Han's from allies in local sectors, brought the Resistance a fighting force capable of engaging with the First Order. Admiral Akbar was building a fleet for the Resistance, but he was encouraged to remain away from battles with dreadnoughts. The Jedi, however, had a much different mission. Rey and Ben, being young and adventurous, decided to do something rash. This was Rey's idea. Something that actually sent Luke into a panic. They, as a dyad, believed they had the potential to take down Snoke, and defeat him in a Jedi-like way. So they snuck into a First Order transport on a world the Jedi had liberated with the Resistance, and then departed for the supremacy inside that transport. This wasn't arrogance by any means. This was just hope to end the conflict. Everything the two of them did was rooted in something positive. When they arrived, they were forced to sneak through the massive warship and into the corridors. By using officers' uniforms, they'd walk past security personnel and towards the main elevator that would take them to Snoke. When they arrived inside the throne room, they saw the Supreme Leader. His throne was facing them, and his eyes opened. A surprise covered his face, but it wasn't upset, it was prideful. Rey and Ben looked to their sides and stepped forward. The most elite of the Praetorian Guard activated their staves, and Snoke welcomed the young Jedi. He tried to attempt a slight manipulation, something that his creator would have done, but Snoke was no Palpatine. Since the Jedi rejected his offer, he would have them killed. The Praetorians rushed in, and the two of them defended themselves, taking each other's backs and fighting off the approaching guardsmen. Snoke laughed, clasping his hands in pure amusement. Rey and Ben slashed their sabers at the guards, and then they were separated, each of them taking on a trio of Praetorians alone. Ben used his heavier brute-like attacks, while Rey used the Force to throw the guards and used lighter parries and counters. They were combined in this movement. Even if their styles were different, they mirrored each other on the other side of the room. Snoke could see this. He noticed something different about their attacks, and so he pulled Ben from his feet, dragging him towards the throne. Ben's saber flipped across the grounds, and Rey bashed her weapon through another guard's body, before another one of them ripped her arm. She could see from the corner of her eye as Ben shook under the pressure of Snoke's grip on the Force. He wanted to know more about the two of them. Rey shoved her weapon into the guard's stomach and released her arm, pulling Ben's saber over her head to defend herself. The guards were relentless, and she was thrown off her feet and across the throne room. She couldn't see Ben from her position, and he could not break free. Snoke was holding Ben right before him, as he demanded an answer. He wanted to know what they were. Their power was unlike anything he had sensed before. Behind them, the Praetorians raised their weapons, and Rey remained still in a knelt position. Ben could sense her reaching out through the Force, and he closed his eyes as a result. They were separated, but still connected. As the Praetorians moved to kill Rey, and the drop of their weapons, Ben's lightsaber appeared inside of his hand, and he shoved it straight through Snoke's body, killing him. The Praetorians at the same time only lightly cut Rey in various locations, but these were not fatal. They missed, because as they were trading the lightsaber through the Force, they disrupted the guard's movement in their strike. A scar lined her cheek, shoulder, and opposite arm. She ignited her lightsaber though, and Ben ripped through one of the guards' backs. Rey got to her feet and parried another, forcing her attack and stabbing the next, before they both killed the third. Snoke was dead. The First Order would be next, though the two Jedi would have to abandon the supremacy. First, they'd set the reactor for detonation. This would claim the lives of General Hux and Captain Phasma, sending the entire First Order into a tailspin. When his Jedi returned to him, Luke did not scold them. He only asked if they were alright, and Rey's new scars were proof that they were survivors. The war with the First Order and the Dark Adepts that forced the remnant power back into rebirth would come to a conclusion in a few short weeks. The Jedi under Luke's direction would continue to crush surviving groups of stormtroopers. Eventually, one of those divisions would reveal Kadera, Lando's long-lost daughter. The cover-up done by the New Republic to make sure no one knew about the First Order would be exposed by Leia, following her discovery of the unfinished Starkiller base. If it weren't for the infighting that split the entire First Order, the galaxy would have paid the ultimate price. As a result, the Republic would slowly break apart and a revolution would be had. But it would be a political one, not a militaristic one. While Luke would actually probably like to scold his students for running away, he wouldn't blame them for everything they did. They saved the galaxy, and this was the joy of Luke's new order. He could tread new ground that hadn't been seen in thousands of years. He had the choice as Grand Master to create the response that would determine how the Order went forward. He would see this as a moment to make some changes. Some less restrictive rules would be made, adjustments to the code he found through years of studying Yoda's sect. The Dyad would continue training as they had for years to come. The New Republic may have been in political turmoil, but it was far from the worst that it could have been in. The First Order was stopped, the Sith and Final Order were gone, and the Jedi remained politically inactive. Master Skywalker kept his focuses on Ossus, as his sister returned to the Galactic Senate, after people realized that they were wrong about her and her relation to Vader. People are not what their bloodlines are. Though Luke's main focus would be making the transition for the Jedi Order easier than it ever was for him. He would dedicate his life to redoing the rules and making adjustments, as new teachers from within the Order grew. Each of his own students from the original sect took on 3 to 10 students apiece of their own once they became masters, and the Jedi as a result grew exponentially. For the Dyad, specifically, they became prodigies of the Jedi Order, Luke's most prized students, the ones who helped destroy the evil regime. As Leia helped restart the New Republic with the foundations established by Mon Mothma, the Jedi Order soared into the future, adding several new members thanks to the destruction of the First Order. The dyad of Rey and Ben would eventually become the leaders of that order, two individuals that bonded through time and treated the other like a sibling. Not only helped push the Order into the future, but transformed the building blocks Luke established into an order that acted more as found family than a religious sect. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the story. So, this story is really two parts. This is the finalization of the Empire War and the ending of the First Order War. I thought it'd be interesting to take an approach with the First Order specifically, where they're more fragmented. General Hux does kill his own father in canon. That's how he becomes General Hux. He and Phasma just kind of gang up and kill him. And I kind of thought it'd be interesting to show that in a way where it's like more revealed. People know about it. And there's a lot of things that go into the First Order. I think the First Order is, at itself, the way it is in canon, the most perfect version of what it could have been. And what I'm saying by that is that, like, there are a lot of things that could have gone wrong for it. The only reason Snoke attacks early and doesn't wait for Starkiller Base is because there's a fragment in the order, in the structure. And so he thinks that the only way to stop that fragment from breaking the entire First Order apart is by sending troops into battle. But as it's seen with Kadera and Finn, these people just didn't really want to murder people. I think the First Order recruitment tactics are kind of the most interesting because it's like you have a slave empire, basically, but these people don't want to be killers. And again, seen with Finn and Kadera. The first part of the story really is just Shadow of the Sith, the book. Really good book, by the way. Highly recommend it. And the rest of it's kind of just a development. I didn't want Rey and Ben to have a romantic attachment. Ben obviously went to the Han Solo school of being attracted to someone 10 years younger than him. So I just thought for this particular story, since they know each other at the ages of 5 and 15, that probably not a good look. That's like really creepy. So I went with a more sibling-like relationship. I think it makes more sense. I also went with Rey, just kind of using Rey as her name for this particular story, just because of how the story develops. It makes more sense in this context. And then I wanted both Luke and I also wanted Rey and Ben to have their moments. I wanted this to be like, when they're kids, Luke gets to defeat Sidious, and without Sidious, Ben is never going to get corrupted. Snoke wasn't really like, Snoke was manipulated, in the Ben Solo comics at least. Snoke is manipulated by Palpatine. That's the only reason why he interacts with Ben Solo. I don't think without Palpatine he would do that. I think he'd just be more interested on the First Order. Regardless, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.